Welcome back to Fresh Outlook. Police and civic leaders are urging calm as a jury began deliberating George Zimmerman's fate after hearing dueling portraits of the neighborhood watchman. Here's the latest now from Sanford, Florida.
It's an intense day for George Zimmerman. After 14 months of investigation and weeks of trial testimony, defense attorney Mark O'Mara presented his closing argument.
Assumption, connecting the dots, sure, but you've agreed not to do that.
Prosecutor Bernie De La Rionda portrayed Zimmerman as a wannabe cop who profiled Martin.
I've been following it since the incident occurred.
Attorney Michael Orcioli says this has been a high-profile trial because it deals with race.
The interesting thing about the case is the prosecution tried the case initially with the highest degree of murder available to them, being second degree. As the facts went in, they kind of backpedaled a little bit. I think the prosecution signaled to the court that they felt their case might not have been as strong.
He was a young boy. He was innocent.
Many Americans, like single parent Don Clark, has been watching the trial since it began.
It involves the death of a child. It involves an act of violence against African Americans.
She believes the Martin family might not receive due justice and is protective of her own daughter.
We need to educate our children. Sometimes you don't want to fault the victim, but sometimes you can control your own fate.
Sharif Mohammed believes it's unfortunate that the media has hyped the trial based on ethnic race.
I really think personally that it's the issues with the law, not so much the race.
The main issue in this case is whether Zimmerman had justifications on utilizing the handgun.
The problem with the law in that case is that Zimmerman went to Martin first because of where he felt Martin shouldn't have been.
As the jury deliberates, Americans are wondering how the residents in Florida will react when the verdict is reached.
I just hope the community does not explode and that it can try to heal itself.
If convicted, Zimmerman could be sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder and up to 30 years for manslaughter.
So the question that the jury faces now, is George Zimmerman a cop wannabe who took the law into his own hands, or is he a well-meaning volunteer who shot Trayvon Martin because he feared for his life? To talk more about this trial of the century, we are joined by Dee Benke, Dr. Bart Rossi, a political psychologist, and Bob Brown, a former police officer and lawyer. We thank you all for joining us. Nice to be here. Wow. This has really been something to watch. I mean, and when they say the trial of the century, I absolutely agree. There's so much going on to this. I want to start with, was the prosecution rather successful? And Bob, I'm going to start with you on this one. You've got such a background being a cop and a lawyer, so.
Well, the prosecution started out with one charge, which was basically murder too. And at the end of the trial, they tried to add lesser included offenses. And one of those that they got in was manslaughter. So if they felt that strong about the murder too, they would have never entertained those other charges. So it really does, it's like a back pedal really for the prosecution to come up with, say, a manslaughter conviction when they were pushing so hard for a murder too.
So are you leaning towards the fact that it might be a manslaughter charge that he'll be facing?
I think it gives the jury of 6 women, and 5 of them are moms, it gives them an option to pick a criminal charge. And even though murder too would be lifetime imprisonment in Florida, this other one, although it's substantial penalty, it is something that down the road he could be paroled out of.
If he does face manslaughter charges, what's he looking at?
From what I understand, it's 15 years plus.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to Dr. Rossi, you're a political psychologist,
right,
about George Zimmerman's behavior in the courtroom. If you can talk to us a little bit about what you noticed.
Well, this is a psychologist delight, this story, actually. I think his behavior trumps everything. He gets out of the car, he has a weapon on him, he follows this young boy, then he calls the police say, don't do that, don't follow. He continues to follow, he uses profanity. And when he calls the police and when he uses profanity, I think he crosses the line in the eyes of the jurors. So I think his behavior and what he actually did is going to be the predominant factor. Race, of course, is weaved into this whole thing, of course. But I think that what he did precipitated this whole event. And as a juror, as a mom, I think people are going to say, gee, if that was my kid walking down the street and someone precipitated this and he's now dead, what do we do?
All right, we're going to get back to that. I also want to talk about his actual behavior in the courtroom as well. When you actually saw him and you observed him, what did you notice?
I don't know how much I could take out of it, except that he seemed like he seemed more troubled to me than anything else. He seemed like a guy that, if I met him, I would think that he was not too sure of himself and rather perplexed about things. He doesn't come across, in terms of his demeanor, as someone who is very comfortable being in his own skin.
Dee Dee, let's hear from you right now. What do you think about all this? I mean,
I think it's a little unfair to say if someone's saying curse words that they're going to kill someone. I mean, they may be a jerk, but it doesn't mean they're a murderer. They may not like him. You may not like his behavior in court, but it doesn't mean he's guilty. So, you know, there's just a lack of evidence here. I think it's going to be very difficult to convict the guy. However, I do think it's interesting what you said about adding manslaughter, because it's like, oh, okay, perhaps our case isn't strong enough, but we want to get him on something. I don't know, this seems kind of unfair, almost like they're changing the rules in the middle of the game.
You think we should let him off?
If he's not guilty. But here's the thing, you don't know if he is, though. It's innocence until proven guilty, and there's no way to prove it.
But it's interesting, let me add also that we are in Florida, of course, Sanford, Florida, where there are 6 jurors. Not 12, there's 6. And Bob, you were saying why that could be so significant.
Well, you know what it is, trying to convince 12 people would be a tough task, but you only have 6. But the problem is with that 6, all 6 are females. And again, 5 of them are mothers. So I think you might get that sympathy going to the Martin family, that they did lose a child, teenager, 17-year-old, you know, unarmed, no weapons on him. And it was a confrontation. But the confrontation escalated from a fist fight to a discharge of a handgun that killed him.
Okay, and if we got a final question for each of you, how do you think that the jury is going to rule? Dee Dee, I'll start with you. What do you think is going to happen?
I don't think he's going to be convicted of murder, manslaughter, possibly.
Manslaughter.
Manslaughter?
Definitely manslaughter, and not an acquittal.
And just what do you think this is going to do for the country, very briefly? Dee Dee?
I think it's very sad this has turned into a big race issue, and I definitely think we need to take cameras out of the courtroom because it's made it a circus, and that's unfortunate.
Well, the courtroom, the cameras should be in the courtroom to show what goes on in these trials, because people really want to know what goes on.
It depends
but they
upon
made
the
it too
judge.
much, too sensationalized.
Yes.
They made it. It made it everything you're looking at, those individuals, like what they were wearing, how they talked, every day. It's almost critiquing a football or baseball game.
As a psychologist, I'm with Dee Dee on this one. I think the camera should be out. It changes the flavor of the whole situation.
Okay. Bob Brown, we want to thank you. You brought some expertise here. Very much thank you for being on Fresh Outlook. And don't you go away, everyone. We're going to return in just a moment and talk more about the plea for peace. Now, as the jury got the murder case Friday, police in the Orlando suburb went on national television to ask for calm across the country, no matter what the verdict is. We'll be right back with much more.